This is your host, Rashad Woods. Today I have a very special guest. He works on resiliency and capturing the most maximum potential out of the human spirit and fighting doubts among people. He's great help. Excellent martial artist, by the way. We can get into that as well, too, because I love martial artists. I'm a black belt myself. Mr. Michael Ostrolenk, how are you, sir?
I'm fantastic. I appreciate you having me on your show today. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, can't wait. I was really excited when I saw your profile and you reached out to me. So I'm glad we got a chance to link up. You know, you have a very interesting background. You've gone from you're a coach. You're also a marriage counselor, certified marriage and family counselor as well too. So give us a little bit of your background on how you have such a diverse skill set.
Yeah, it's actually even crazier than that. We can get into that too.
Yeah, let's do that.
But yeah, I'm actually almost 30 years licensed as a marriage and family therapist at the state of California. I don't long reside in California.
Right.
Been a coach for about 25 years. About a decade working at SEALFIT under the auspices of Commander Mark Devine, creating and running his Unbeatable Mind Academy.
Yeah.
Worked for another SEAL-based company called Spartan 7. Unfortunately, the gentleman, Dan Cirillo, passed away 2 years ago.
Sorry to hear about that.
Collapsed. Great dude, but great company.
Yeah.
And other opportunities too. And I was director of human resilience at a T.R.O.N. Zoe. It's a precision-based medical clinic. I'm presently in Austin, Texas, here in Austin.
I saw that on your LinkedIn profile. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I'm nomadic. So, well, I shouldn't say that completely. I've been in Texas for about a year, came from Ecuador, and I'm probably leaving here in about 4 months. Yeah.
Really? So you've gone from California, you're in New York, you're Texas, Ecuador. You know, what keeps you moving all the time? How do you have that kind of environment? Like, is it just where the road takes you?
Yeah. So the original impetus for the traveling was actually a divorce.
Okay.
Separation, need to be separated from your wife for a certain period of time for the whole thing to happen.
Yeah.
And I was like, instead of just moving down the street and waiting for the whole process to unfold, I'm just going to hit the road.
Right.
I don't need that much stuff. I don't have that much stuff.
Yeah.
So like I literally for about a year and a half traveled around the country. Also went to South America. Yeah. And I kind of landed here in Austin, Texas. Been here for about a year.
Nice.
But I'm gonna pick up my roots and travel again soon.
Man, so you're backpacking it, right? So that's dope. That's kind of the way the human spirit can operate, man. And what I found fascinating for you is that it seems like you said you've always had to push your limits even at a young age. So what inspired you to want to help people, reach their potential?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. And it is really a driver of all the things I've done. I was really lucky. I had really supportive parents. And the reason I say it that way is I had some troubles as a kid, learning disabilities. I had some health issues. They came together and they led me to be what's called a hair puller. Like I pull my hair. It's an obsessive compulsive disorder. It's around 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
And the funny story, and then it leads to answer your question, is my mom took me to see a psychiatrist. This is 1979, a long time ago.
Yeah, before it's socially acceptable to really taking kids to do that and stuff like that.
Yeah, which is very true. And then also consider back in the day, in the 70s, 80s, even 90s, probably still today, most psychiatrists just put you on medication.
Exactly, 150%.
Which, no argument. Fortunately for me, that didn't work out. Mm-hmm. And so I sat with the psychiatrist. I did my first session with him. My mom's sitting next to me because I'm a child. And apparently I turned to her and I said, he's fat and he smokes. He can't help himself. How's he going to help me? And I literally walked out of the room, which is effing obnoxious for a 9-year-old, right? But it was true to a certain extent.
I always say this. I always say, if you ever want to be told a lie, don't be in front of a kid, because they can't lie about things, right?
Isn't that awesome?
I got 3 daughters, and if you ever want to be told, like, hey, you're 6'5" and have washboard abs, don't ask your child.
That's awesome.
No, don't do it.
She was like, Dad, you need to do some more sit-ups.
Exactly. That's exactly how the conversation goes.
Keto diet or something.
Yeah, then you're on punishment for that, by the way.
That's funny. Oh, man. So I walked out. My mom agreed with me. I got really lucky because I could have gotten really a lot of trouble, but instead she found me a therapist, a psychotherapist, not a psychiatrist.
Right.
This is Pat Lawson. And Miss Lawson, this is 1979, taught me biofeedback. And you can imagine technology is nothing what it was today, but as a little kid, when biofeedback was awesome. Right, she taught me guided imagery, meditation, got me to the martial arts. And that just kind of opened my whole world up to like self-regulation, self-management, the kind of more of a warrior approach to life in terms of mastering oneself and stuff like that. And because of my experiences with her, and opening me up to this whole new world, I wanted to contribute to what helped me for helping other people, to answer your question originally.
Right. So you eventually went to the coaching to the New York Mastery SEALFIT Unbeatable Mind Academy.
Well, so a couple different things. So my first foray into kind of the therapeutic coaching world is I got a master's degree in John F. Kennedy University in transpersonal counseling psychology. I did postgraduate work at the California Institute for Integral Studies in somatic or body psychology.
Oh, wow.
So that was all kind of my postgraduate studies. And I can answer any questions you have about that before I get into anything else.
Just learning the human condition, right? Just learning what makes it right. And what kind of courses? So that's so deep because like it goes from people's mental state to depression to the chemical imbalances that can take place in the human body, endorphins. So what details did you find out? Like what preconceived notions were there versus what you found out through your studies and education?
Well, so my graduate degree was in transpersonal counseling psychology. So in order to get licensed in the state of California, you have to study all the conventional schools of psychology, object relations and self-psychology and family systems, cognitive behavioral. So I learned all those things, but my specialization is transpersonal. I can answer the question you just asked. So what are some of the things I studied? So transpersonal means through and beyond the personal. So if you look at all the religious systems in the world, whether Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, the shamanic traditions from South and Central America or Africa, all of them to one degree or another have practices that they encourage their members to do to change consciousness. Yes. Prayer, meditation, yogic breathing, or breathing practices, if it's from yoga, it's yoga breathing practices. Plant medicine, sensory deprivation, chanting, a variety of different, depending on what the religious system is, but they have their various practices. So we actually study those different practices. And we try to understand how they affect human consciousness, human health, and well-being, whether it's plant medicine or sensory deprivation or meditation or various things. And there's a lot of growing research to support the various practices in terms of improving health and well-being. So that's some of the things I studied in grad school.
Right. And so now you go, and you also worked in national security as well, too. Like, how did you even what is this dichotomy? Like, all of a sudden you're in then all of a sudden you're working in cyber threats, cyber influence, Federal Reserve, when it comes to transparency and everything like that. Man, how did that delve into?
Okay. So the joke is that two things. I follow my curiosity and I'm a hole filler. And you're like, oh, there's something not being done there. I should go do that. And I'll lay that as kind of larger thematic things in my life. Yeah. I don't know if you know the work of Ken Wilber. He written probably about 20 books on integral theory.
Okay.
And when I finished my graduate work, I was invited to join his think tank.
Oh, wow.
And it had different divisions in the think tank. And one of the divisions was politics. And that wasn't mine. I was actually education. I should have been psychology, but I was education because at the time I was building educational programs at a university in California.
Yeah.
But I met a gentleman, Drexel Sprecher, who was part of the political branch. And we talked for like 4 hours. He's like, wow. I need you to be part of the political branch because the way your mind thinks. Cool. Yeah, so Ken invited me to the political branch and I started meeting people. And one of the people I met was a lady named Betsy Learfeld, whose partner was Jim Turner, who's one of the first 6 NATO raiders in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
Big, strong proponent of health freedom, access to organic foods and natural medicines and dietary supplements. And he did yeoman's work in that space. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. But I met Jim, and I just moved back to the East Coast, and I was transferring my license and getting ready to open up a practice. And Jim's like, well, while you're waiting to do that, why don't you do some work for me? I'm like, cool.
Why not?
Okay, why not? Exactly. I'm interested in natural medicine. I actually spent a couple of years working with a couple of doctors in California in integrated medicine kind of space. So that's kind of right up my alley anyways, mind, body medicine.
Right.
So I got into the policy world and I can tell you stories upon stories, but it opened one door after the other, the other after the other. And eventually it led me from doing kind of healthcare freedom type work to civil liberties type work. And then all of a sudden it just moved into the national security space, which is foreign policy, defense reform, cybersecurity, all kinds of stuff.
For sure.
And literally it was me just going, wow, no formal education except as a therapist, but I'm a quick study and I'd read and talk to all the experts in the field, learn enough that I could step in and actually participate in conversations and help move policy. And I give you the most funniest example. Towards the end of my career, I was on a panel on Capitol Hill on the future.
That's crazy.
Yeah. On the future of counterterrorism. And I was with former CIA, former DIA guy, a former SEAL, and there might have been another guy from, I can't remember which government agency he was from.
That's what I was just alluding to. I'm like, people spend decades trying to get, they go through, hey, I'm going to go through college, I'm going to go through the military, then I'm going to go through law enforcement, and then their application sits in a queue, and then they have to pass all these rigorous exams, to get even a sniff of that opportunity. And here you are, because of the connections that you made, because of the right people that you talk to, because of your intuition, your people skills, and your background. You're like, I'm going to go around that, and I'm still, and I'm sitting right here.
Which is really crazy, because I look at like half the stuff I did in the policy space, and I'm like going, like you said, I'm not formally educated. It's not my background.
Right.
But, I'm like, oh, I want to learn that. I studied as deeply as possible. And I operated from what I call a transpartisan perspective, through and beyond the partisan. So if you throw an issue my way, I'll be like, okay, how did the conservatives think about that? How did the neoconservatives think about that? How did the paleoconservatives, the progressives, the liberals, the Greens, the libertarians? I just want to understand from all the different perspectives. And then I'll take all the academics too. I'm like, oh, how did the different viewpoints in academia look at this particular issue?
Absolutely.
So I did that with like half a dozen different issues. And then I found people to hire me to do stuff in that space.
Hey, listen, and that's what consulting turns into, and you become the subject matter expert. And I think it may have benefited you, because you're like, hey, listen, I'm not coming in here that I went to this educational institution and I was able to only have this perspective. I'm not your alumni. I am a guy from the outside looking in who can take a bird's eye view on these topics at hand, right?
So I had two parallel lives, full-time jobs, coaching and therapy, and then the public policy work for about 20 years together.
That's insane, man. So I wonder, I hope you don't tell me anything I'm not supposed to hear, so I don't, get anybody who's listening, please don't tell me anything to put me in danger, so to speak. Right. So you did tactical training as well too, right? Like, man, like this is deep. Yeah. You got so many different things you dive. How did that, what's that next layer?
Yeah. So and this is the whole feeling. I want to understand these things. I'm a civil libertarian. So this is around the Patriot Act time. Patriot Act passed in 2001. Around 2003, I think some of the provisions were back up, 505, 702, and 215. And as a civil libertarian, I'm a Fourth Amendment promoting. And I'm like, so I'm running around the Hill, Capitol Hill, saying we should protect the Fourth Amendment. We should protect the Fourth Amendment. And except for a few libertarian Republicans and a few libertarian Democrats, most people are like, security, security, security. Well, we should give up our rights so we can be more secure. And I'm like, right. I don't believe that to be true. But in making these arguments, we got a lot of pushback. Yeah, but security, there's real threats out there. I'm like, yeah, there are real threats. We should deal with the threats, but it doesn't mean we have to deprive ourselves of our inalienable rights to life, liberty, and happiness. But that argument wasn't going very far. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, I need to better understand how they think about security.
Right.
So I'm like, well, I don't have time to go get 12 years into the security apparatus. So I'm going to go get some training.
Absolutely.
So I became a PI. I got trained as a PPS, a personal protection specialist. I did a few different classes. I did some classes with some former Mossad guys on counterterrorism. So I just wanted to kind of dive in and kind of understand security and investigations more from the law enforcement security side of things. Right. And I did that for a couple of years. And I literally did that for a couple of years while I was doing all these other things too. But it's more of the mindset I wanted to understand.
What type of discipline does it take to actually get involved in that? Because, TV is one thing. Like, I've heard, documentaries or even YouTube videos where people are like, listen, man, it's not as action-packed as people make it out to be. It's very detailed. It's very methodical. It's very research-based and driven and behavior-based driven and things like that.
So for instance, as a personal protection specialist, I remember when I was in school studying this stuff, and it was a great program. Executive Protection Institute is who I studied underneath.
I've seen that.
Yeah, they're really, really good. And I remember they shared with us I think there's three schools approaches to personal protection: the American, the British, and the Israeli.
Okay.
And the American is you if your principal is under threat, you remove him from the territory he's under threat on. Cool. The British is you set a perimeter, you protect him from the threat. Okay. The Israelis go attack the threat. And it's like just a completely different mindset, which makes sense because in America, you're not going to have real threats. I mean, occasionally you might have someone who dislikes their policies, and they might become verbally abusive. They might put things at them. But most of the time, there's not like an assassination attempt or kidnapping attempt. Like, maybe the same principal goes to Mexico, they could get kidnapped, or Colombia, they could get kidnapped. But that doesn't really too much happen here in the States.
Right.
So it's less of a really physical threat against the person. Not completely, because there are crazy people out there who might want to threaten your principal.
Without question.
But it's different. I eventually got trained and certified so I could carry under State Department contract internationally, because that would be more interesting. Like if you take your principal and you go to third world country, real threats exist.
Absolutely.
More of a real threat exists.
Well, you hear about it, like they've stormed capitals of presidents' houses and actually dragged them out in certain countries before.
Yeah.
So things of that nature when it came to other locations. So just the ability. I mean, man, geez, you went to college and you just kind of went off the course and found this along the way, and it's just one thing led to another. Like I assumed when I was reading your background that you were ex-military. That's the first thing I thought of. First thing I was like, okay, he did SEAL Fit, so I was like, well, maybe that's associated with military. But it's like, no, it's just like kind of a hell week to put yourself through a small fraction of what those guys and what those people go through.
Yeah, with SEAL Fit. So, and I ended up working for SEAL Fit for a decade, but
right,
I can tell you the story of what led me to SEAL Fit. So I was 39 and my wife at the time was like, what do you want to do for your 40th birthday? It's kind of a big deal. I'm like, and she's thinking I'm going to say, go to the islands and hang out the islands and have a good time. And, I'd spent some time with people from Navy Special Warfare and some of the other work I was doing. So I'm like, I want to look into that. So I looked into that, and Mark Devine, Commander Devine, had what's called 3-week SOF Academy. It's a 3-week program. You live on campus.
Yeah.
You train. It's really 4 weeks, but you train for 3 to 4 weeks, like 12, 14 hours a day. And it's a pre-BUDS training program. So is preparing young men who want to go Navy Special Warfare. Mark has about an 80% success rate of people who go through his program and make it through BUDS.
Yeah.
And then on the tail end of that, he had something called Kokoro, Indomitable Spirit Camp, which is modeled after Hell Week, which you just mentioned, but it's 50 hours instead of 5 full days. It's a civilian version of Hell Week. I lived with him for a month. Trained 12 to 14 hours a day. The 5 guys I live with all became SEALs. I was 39. I was going
right.
Yeah, they're all like 21, 22, 23, young guys. And actually, the funny thing is, like, one of them just is retiring. I was like, oh,
that's
my God. Yeah.
Right. Like, that's insane.
Yeah. So I did the 3-week, which is really 4 weeks training program. I can tell you some funny stories. I did Kokoro camp. And then like a year later, Mark reaches out to me. He's like, I want to take what we did in that month-long period of time and create a training program, but not just for young men who want to go Navy Special Warfare, but for hockey moms and hockey dads and law enforcement, but scale it, because not people can't take a month off to go train.
No question.
Yeah.
Right. So you truncate it in a smaller period of time.
Yeah. And make it online and videos and audios and written materials and all kinds of stuff, in-person training. So he brought me on and we built that, and I launched it and I ran that for him and other programs for him as well.
What makes that cool too is people can get stagnant in their personal or professional lives. And so now that's the chance where, like, okay, now I'm going back to a discipline level, and it can make you a better at any level of where you're at professionally or personally, a better wife, a better husband, a better brother, a better coworker,
100%.
So, right. And so now all of a sudden you're like, I put myself through this to reach a better version of myself, because it's easy for people to go through the motions of anything. Like, you do martial arts. Like, I'm sure you were a better martial artist after you did this, because, like,
can I tell you a funny story?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, let me tell you something that'll tell you the funny story. Well, actually, both are kind of funny. So I remember when I finished the 3-week SOF Academy in Kokoro camp, my wife at the time, like maybe like a year later, I was complaining about something. And she's like, I wouldn't keep complaining. I'm like, why? She's because I'm going to tell Commander Devine you're complaining. But so and this is the martial arts stuff. So I was training to be an assistant. I was training, and then I was an assistant Krav Maga instructor.
That's a tough style.
Yeah, it was awesome.
It's a tough style.
To a law enforcement class. So we had police officers, federal and state. Well, actually, this is federal, state, and local. And I would go back to San Diego. This is in DC Metro, and I'd go back to San Diego once a quarter for SEAL Fit.
Yeah.
And I'd go, teach and train and all that kind of good stuff. And I'd come back with new ideas. And the cops hated me coming back with new ideas, because I'd be like, I know how to crush you guys even more. Because my thinking was this, and you'll appreciate this. It's like police officers are under undue amounts of stress when they're detaining a perpetrator, chasing them in a car or on foot, or whatever it is. So they're ratcheted up, like adrenalized.
Absolutely.
But this isn't a war. They need to learn how to manage themselves while making an arrest, so they don't hurt someone. The appropriate use of force.
Exactly. Right.
So I would put these guys under immense pressure, like from the stuff I learned from SEAL Fit, to bring it back, crush them, and then have them fight.
Yeah.
And they hated it, but they loved it because they recognized like it's really, that's going to make them better at law enforcement.
Well, the thing is about when it comes to, I mean, they have to be their attention has to be 24/7, right? With the person that could have a switchblade, a gun, a weapon, somebody
Right.
who right, exactly, right, and somebody even walking down the street. I mean, it can go from what they call 0 to 100 real quick, right?
100%.
So you know what I mean, and so and the reality about it is I say this all the time. This as a martial artist, there's a lot of talented people out there, and you need to be extra precautious because you can run into a guy who's you've trained. Guys are doing tournaments. They're winning gold medals every other weekend. There's Golden Gloves guys out there. There are some seriously upper level people that if you're not careful, you'll get sparked out quick, man.
Well, I mean, back in my day, it was like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now it's like UFC stuff. Like, yeah, everyone's training in the mixed martial arts, jiu-jitsu, all kinds of stuff. Yeah,
no doubt, man. When I'm 42, and the only places that were available, it was either wrestling in high school or a karate or a taekwondo place.
Taekwondo. That's my first martial art as a kid.
Yeah, because that's all that was like within a 15 to 20 mile radius of your house, right? So now you look at, now there's jiu-jitsu places, now there's Muay Thai places, and you're just like, my gosh, like this was just not available. Post 2000 it is, but pre, man, you can forget about it, man.
Yeah, I'm in my middle 50s, so like, I did. I feel you on like the Taekwondo or karate or
100%. So, I wanted to circle back a bit when you talked about, the Patriot Act stuff. I was in college when 9/11 happened.
Okay.
And so what made it so interesting when you said about securities and civil liberties was, back in the day, you could pick somebody up at the airport and hang out in the airport, right? You could literally just, if your friend was working, at the McDonald's inside of there, you could just drive in there, chill, have, everything changed post that. So here you are right in the thick of things, and it just does a 180, right? And that had to be chaotic, man, because you're learning it on the fly.
Well, it's really interesting because like there's perception, there's reality. So I opposed most of the government programs at the time. I retired from this 4 years ago, so I'm not really paying up too much close attention. I'm
right, for sure.
Now. But, I spent 20 years in the space. And, the government would claim this program, whatever the program is, does this. And you look at the research on it when they get tested out and it doesn't. Like TSA, this is back in the day, I don't know their numbers now, but they failed more than they succeeded in terms of when someone would try to get like bombs, guns, or knives through. Intentionally. I don't mean a criminal or a terrorist, but like they would test the systems out.
Right.
In so many cases, I think it's the majority of them, that the TSA would fail, which is like, man, we're putting all this time, effort, and money into these programs, and they actually don't. They don't work.
Right. And then,
real threats.
But what had happened was so massive, so cataclysmic. Everything was on the table, so to speak. And so, like, I'm paraphrasing this a little bit. I would guess the dissenting voices were not being heard because they're like, I don't want to hear that. This is plowing forward, whether you like it or not, right? Because it was just nothing like that had never happened.
You nailed it, and that's why I went to start studying the terrorism, counterterrorism, security, all that stuff, because I want to understand from that perspective.
Yeah.
So I can make the arguments like, I can make the arguments all day long, Fourth Amendment, but right after 9/11, for the first couple of years, most people were scared. They wanted to give up their freedoms or liberties for security. But then the arguments, okay, let's just assume for the moment where you're going to do that, but are you actually more secure? Right. And a lot of the arguments can be made, like, you're actually less secure because these programs actually don't work for the most part, or didn't work as much as they could have worked. Yeah.
I have to talk about you as a resiliency coach because everything that you went through seems like you built up a pretty indomitable spirit. And that means that no BS, no excuses, get right down to business. And, you put yourself through hell week when obviously, you didn't have to do that. And so what did you find out from people who went through it? And more importantly, how did you find out about yourself?
Yeah, so the Kokoro camp is modeled after Hell Week. I just want to make it clear I didn't go through the...
I apologize, yes.
No. Still Hell Week. I went to the civilian version under Commander Divine. And I'll just call him Mark because he's a friend, but Commander Divine.
Yeah.
He'd always say you'll meet yourself for the first time going through this stuff. And it's so true because you run into yourself. Like, your emotional, physical, and mental limitations.
Right.
Because you think about it, you're literally, you don't sleep. You're training for 50 hours. You're in the ocean, on the beach, on the grinder, log PT, subs, pull-ups, push-ups. You do Murph. You're doing all of the various CrossFit workouts. You're in the mountains. Really, and you get to eat, but there's no sleep. So, and this is the greatest thing. You'll have two different SEALs because they had SEALs come in and SEAL cadres come in and do this for us. And they tell you two different thing is they give you different instructions. You're like, which way do I go?
Right.
So like it's emotionally stressful. You're physically exhausted. You're mentally exhausted. And what you tap into is what Mark calls Kokoro, your indomitable spirit, your heart or your spirit.
Right.
Because your body is like, I want to give up. Your emotions are all over the place. Your mind's crazy. Yeah.
And you get past the point of exhaustion, right? Because then your body's like, I mean, I'll take my own. I haven't gone anywhere close with that, but when you get intensely training in martial arts, and you start finding out what you're really made of, right? There's a difference between going against the guy who's somewhat out of shape and you can handle. But when you're going against a beast, you're going against somebody who's really talented, and you find out real quick. You know what, man? I think those Saturdays I was sleeping in, it's time to step the game up a little bit, bro, because that ain't gonna cut it. Not with the level that I'm doing. And so that's amazing. So when you get in these soccer moms and you get in these dads, like how did the bodies adjust to such an extreme change? Is there like a period to kind of acclimate somebody?
Well, if we're talking about SEAL Fit Unbeatable Mind Academy, it's we have different degrees of the program at the time. And some people just fell off the couch, and some people are elite athletes and everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
So we would organize the training where those people are at and help them get to the next level.
Yeah,
it wasn't like, hey, fall off the couch, you can do skill level training. That's
right.
That's asking for trouble. When I presently work with clients and more in the resilience space, it's very similar. Where are you at? And what are the next steps? And I have a friend of mine, Dennis Stoica, is a former Marine. He's law enforcement now. Yeah. And he wrote a book. It's called 1% Better Every Day. Which I want to make sure I say it properly. I'm going to mess it up. It's like the subtitle's like 1% better every day. And I always think about that. Like for my clients, I want them to be 1% better every day. So if they're not if they're not elite athletes, that's okay. You can start here. You can start ratcheting up a little bit, improve your, physical performance, your mental resilience, your emotional resilience, your spiritual resilience, your interpersonal resilience. It takes time, training, and effort. And there's no magic pills. Like that's the challenge here in America, at least, is like, instant gratification. We order something from Amazon and it shows up yesterday. 100%. But like, if you want to be more resilient mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, and interpersonally, you got to do work, daily practices. That's required.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I thought I was in shape at one point, and then I was doing jujitsu with a classmate. We're really cool. I wouldn't call us super close friends, but we're tight. And so his wife filmed it, and then he sent me the video through Messenger, and then I was like, I didn't realize I was that out of shape.
Oh, right.
My stomach was like flat. Here I am thinking, I'm like, looking feeling good. And then to your point, until you get an outside perspective, a non-biased visual view of where you're at. And I literally cleared my fridge after that. I'm like, I look like crap. Nice. Right. And so I'm not saying but to your point, you can't hide from that. And so you find out who you really are, and it humbles you. It really does.
Yeah. So, and to that point, when I start working with clients, I'm not a doctor or nutritionist, but fitness, movement, diet, nutrition, sleep, all those are important pieces of my work. And I have all my clients get baseline blood work. Right. I want to understand where they're at, work with a functional medicine doctor, work with an epigenetics coach, get their baselines. And there's some psychological testing I do as well with people, because you get the baselines and you can show improvements over time, which is really important, because you don't know where you're starting. Well, a DEXA scan, which your fat muscle ratio is like, I'm 25% body fat, or I'm 15% body fat, or I'm 10% body fat. At least you know where you're starting from.
Absolutely.
And then you do all the practices and the disciplines, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, interpersonally, and hopefully you see improvements over time.
Well, I think the key you hit too is that people have the instant gratification is even worse now, because to your point, the buttons are easy to access, but the process isn't any quicker. Right. The back end work. Right. So people are like, I measure my calories every day. Yeah, that's cool. But if you're not actually still working out, or not still actually changing your diet, you're not doing anything. You order a pizza. The pizza hasn't actually made faster. Your communication just got faster of your pizza itself.
Right.
You still have to put the ingredients on top of it, cook it through the oven for 12 minutes, right? So people are like, I started dieting, and you can't put a window on when you're going to get in shape. I'm going to just be in shape for 6 months. I'm just going to be mentally strong for 6 months, because you've already set an end date to where that's going to be capped out at.
Right. And, just in instant gratification, I work with a lot of young men, and the availability of like monster drinks and like supplements, which I'd question the validity of them in terms of long-term health consequences, or even a lot of like steroids and stuff. Like a lot of these young guys are like, okay, they're going to be in great shape, but they're screwing themselves if they ever want to be a parent or a father. Or their long-term health of their heart, because they're taking all these stimulants. I'm like, man, it's crazy.
It's so funny you say that because, like, if you actually look, everybody who can Google will be like, okay, half these influencers. I'm not dissing them; just obviously some great shape people, but a lot of them are on steroids. Like that's it's just a fact. Anybody who's been worth a salt in their gym will say there's no way that's natural. There's just no way that's natural. So, but the image of it pushes people to dangerous places.
Yeah, especially these young people. It's one thing if you're like in your 50s and 60s, you're on TRT because your levels are low and you're working with a functional medicine doctor, and you're working with a whole cascade of hormones.
100%. Absolutely.
But like not when you're 21.
No.
And your testosterone should be at a normal. I mean, now there are problems in our society, culturally, environmentally speaking. So sperm levels are lower, testosterone levels are lower because how we poison our environment. But, so there might be younger people who have trouble, but not the number of people that I'm noticing.
Right.
They're not having trouble. They're just trying to be jacked.
Right. The sheer availability of it all, just is through the roof. I tell you, you probably have you written any books? I just have to ask that before.
So I have a book sitting over here that's unpublished.
Okay. Because this is I could probably pick your brain for probably like 2 days, and I probably still wouldn't have scratched the surface, But in respect to your time, I think that this is one of the most fascinating, stories I've ever heard. Country hopper, state hopper, federal government, resiliency coach, worked with Navy SEALs, helps train law enforcement, expert martial artist. Like, man, this is just, you got a roundabout skill set. And that's what the T.R.O.N podcast is all about, to talk to people like you.
I appreciate I've enjoyed this conversation, man. If you ever want to continue it offline, I'm more than happy to jump on the Zoom with you.
No, I appreciate it. Tong Sudo, Taekwondo, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and Muay Thai myself. So
nice. Okay.
Yeah. Gotta love it. I love martial arts, man. I love people. I love talking to people about it too.
That's cool. Offline, there's some people I would like to hook you up with for possible guests if you're interested.
I would love that, man.
Okay.
Cool. I love a great conversation. So, Michael, I appreciate your time. And that's what the T.R.O.N podcast is all about, people like you and the great work that you do. And I can't thank you enough for carving out some time for me.
I appreciate you, man. Thanks.
Yeah. Have a great one.
You too.